All right. I think you guys should be able to see my little pasty face here. I'll go ahead and adjust my screen a little bit and go ahead and pull my presentation back up. I got to open up the old chat window. Nice to see everybody back here too. I'll go ahead and start teeing this up a little bit. So we started coming up with the idea a couple months back as people were dealing with some of the other presentations we had during Mental Health Awareness Month. And then we also had, I believe, a couple of fitness presentations that some of our science tutors did. And so I went to our head tutor and I kind of had this brainstorm idea that it would be kind of cool to put together a colloquium series of maybe about a presentation a month. And the idea there was that we would focus on a different topic and relative to exercise and sports science and just kind of some of the application aspects of it and some of the kind of the take home points that people can kind of take away from our presentations in terms of kind of optimizing their health and well-being. And so my specialty down here at Georgia State is I'm an exercise and health science professor, and I have a number of expertise, but psychology, exercise prescription and testing, and health promotion and planning are my big ones. So I went ahead and floated the idea to my lead tutor of developing, like I said, a presentation per month addressing a different topic. And this will be the first in a series. I believe she has 4 of them scheduled, and I believe it's just one a month. And so the 4 that we have scheduled so far, starting from tonight, tonight's is more on the psychology side of looking at how we can adopt and maintain health and fitness behaviors. And then starting next month, I'm going to get into more of the micro stuff about strength training for 1 month, aerobic training for the other month, a concept called periodization, which is how you go about actually putting together training routine and some of the variables therein. And so we're just going to kind of proceed along that line. And we're going to do this, I think, until she reels me back in. It's just something I love to do, is talk about stuff like this, very passionate about it, and have a lot to say about it. So I'm going to go ahead and just welcome again. Looks like I've admitted everybody that I've seen here to the forum here. Like I said, hopefully everybody can see our PowerPoint. I'm looking at kind of a truncated view of it, but I'm wearing my glasses so I can see it. So again, I want to welcome everybody to it. I'll go ahead and get started. So again, the first in this series, the idea here that we have is kind of starting on the larger side of sport and larger side of exercise and health promotion and health education. So what I wanted to do here is I wanted to kind of get in a little bit to sport and exercise psychology. And the idea here is I want to kind of address some of the issues that people have when they try to adopt an exercise behavior or maintain an exercise behavior. And again, this kind of stems from the field of sport and exercise psychology. So something that I actually know a lot about as an athlete, someone who's had some issues previously in my life that I had to work through. I look forward to maybe hearing some of the feedback that some of you all have as I kind of get into this. But the idea here is tonight, I wanted to go ahead and I wanted to address these different objectives right here. All right, so the idea is, oh, the bottom is cut off. Let me go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and roll with the big boy presentation and see if this makes any difference. Are we better here? Maybe we have a whole presentation there now. If people have kind of heard me before talk about a couple different things, I'm an old school college professor. I still use the scrolling dry erase board and sock puppets and shadow puppets. So being here at Purdue Global is just kind of a new thing for me. And I'm learning, the learning curve is pretty high. So anyway, what I want to do tonight in terms of presentation objectives is I want to discuss these 4 different things here. And the 4th of which is just kind of providing an interactive forum for just people like me and whoever else wants to contribute for what we call best practices and techniques. And then the first three is just we're going to discuss some common barriers, some general strategies to how you adopt and certainly maintain an exercise program. And then I want to kind of get into three proven techniques. One thing I will add just real quick, because I could go through this, but I did play college football at UCLA way back in the day, and we had sport and exercise psychologists come onto campus quite a bit and work with the athletes on how to construct their off-season exercise programming to prepare for the next year of football. And then I did a stint back in the day in Southern California, where I'm from, on amateur bodybuilding. So this was all something that I tried to live back in the day when I had a lot more hair than this and I was a little on the younger side. So this is something, again, I feel very passionate about, and something I hope you guys can kind of tail onto this with me for. So there are basically four common barriers that anybody who looks into health promotion and health education, they all seem to kind of run across these barriers as to why people stop everything from a New Year's resolution to just, any program, health or fitness program that they want to start. And so one thing I want to say is it says exercise regimen, but a lot of these same barriers deal with some health issues too, like diet. That is going to be one of our presentations one month. So a lot of these different types of barriers will kind of cross over from the exercise side to kind of the health behavior side. Exercise certainly is a type of health behavior. All right. So this presentation is more on adopting an aerobic or an exercise or anaerobic exercise program. But I want you to understand that as we continue on in this colloquium series, and I kind of hope everybody can kind of find some time to kind of build on this with me, is some of this stuff will kind of transfer across and it'll go to different kind of programming aspects. So lack of time, lack of motivation, personal limitations, and lack of self-confidence. So the thing that I kind of look at that pops off to me as someone who's kind of walked through this is kind of the whole, let me get back to it here real quick, the lack of motivation aspect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation here, and there's a couple different types I want to highlight. One type is called intrinsic motivation. The other type is called extrinsic motivation. Personal limitations, there's another concept in psychology, if you guys are familiar with that field, called self-efficacy. So personal limitations usually are psychologically based, and they usually reside in the mind, and quite often these can be overcome by self-confidence and self-efficacy. So a lot of personal limitations. I mean, there are some people who have legitimate, obviously, physical challenges, either kind of body compositional challenges or body functioning challenges. So certainly there are limitations that people have, and that's why there's a field like adaptive exercise that seeks to kind of optimize some of those limitations they have. But a lot of this, actually, I found with some of these barriers to adopting consistent exercise, they're all kind of mentally and psychologically based. So, really kind of working with people and their mentation and their cognition and their perception, that goes an awful long way into helping people along those lines. So in terms of lack of time, this obviously is something I've said in the past, something I hear all the time from my students down here in the South. And the idea is there's all these extrinsic obstacles that people have, and they're usually obstacles that require, different investments in time and attention. And obviously, these are the three biggies right here. So work, family, and social obligations and commitments. So, those are kind of some of the bigger problems that a lot of people in exercise and health design see. And so something that we want to go ahead and kind of call to attention to here. So, there's a lot of fixes there and a lot of different things that people in the business, every time I click on a button here, it goes right away, that we kind of look at in terms of, how we can address some of the lack of time concepts. So, the idea here is, I kind of look at it this way, our time allocations, I look at kind of like a pizza, and there's different slices in the pizza, right? And some slices are bigger than the other slices. So the idea here with time is that, your work slices might be bigger than your family slices, or obviously different sizes, or family might be bigger than work, whatever, but social obligations are there as well. So the idea here is if you have competing priorities, then one of the fixes that you can do is you can do what we call behavioral substitution. All right. And the idea here is you want to slice off a little bit of piece of the pizza slice, right? You want to just kind of make it a little less big, and you know it's important to your overall sense of self. But the idea is you want to find downtimes, and you want to find times where you can take some of those family work or social obligation requirements and say, hey, this is important to how I function. This is important to who I am as I define myself as a person. But let me see if I can carve a little piece from that. All right. And I can use that time within that piece to try to fashion together some type of exercise routine. So that's one kind of fix that we see. The other one that we do is something called a movement snack. All right. And this is something that we've kind of teach a lot about in exercise and health science now. And the idea here is back in the day, we used to think that, oh, we have to do all of our exercise, we have to do all of our fitness training in one chunk of time. And that was kind of the old school way of thinking, is that you have to do things in one chunk of time. But exercise and health science now has said, you know what? There's advantages to do that, but there's also a lot of advantages to breaking that big chunk up of time into smaller chunks. And you're still going to get a lot of dividends in terms of the amount of minutes per day, because a lot of people think that, well, I have to do it all at one time, like I said, but really in actuality, it's about how many total minutes are you doing exercise per day, right? It's about how many are you doing per session. And that's the end all be all of the answer. Now science is saying, you know what, it's cumulative. And the idea is if you put in the minutes per day that you need to, it doesn't all have to be at one time. All right. So this is something that we call kind of a movement snack. All right. So the idea there is we're not really looking at how much you do per session. It's just more about the accumulation of time during a day. So the idea here is I'm down here at the bottom here. I say think macro, right? Macro meaning large, micro meaning small, like microscope. So thinking macro means not thinking about sessions and how long you work out per session. All right, that's thinking micro. Thinking macro is my session fits into my day, but it doesn't have to be structured rigidly, if you're kind of flowing with me right there. So again, we want to kind of think of the overall aspect of this and not the micro aspect of it. Okay, if that makes sense to you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to minimize this a little bit. And I want to get to some of my Zoom stuff here and just kind of make sure that we got a lot of people that I need to admit as well. This is, just to be honest with you guys, this is something that I'm kind of struggling with a little bit, is having 5 different hands so I can do different things. My wife, who's also a professor, is like, well, I can do all the admitting for you if you want me to. And I'm like, no, I think I can do it. It's just, like I said, it's a learning curve. All right. So let me get back to the presentation just real quick. So where I'm at right now is I'm addressing the lack of time for those that just kind of came into this session. So the lack of time frequently involves those 3 aspects that you see there on the left column. And what I just discussed for the last 3 or 4 minutes is kind of the fix to the problem. So the idea is just shaving off little pieces of what we call, you know, those most important aspects of yourself, and trying to kind of substitute some productive exercise within some of the curated kind of time that you've given yourself, right? So how you do that is through something called a movement snack. And again, all I try to kind of pound down there was we are looking more about the amount of time you spend per day, not necessarily about the amount of time you spend per session, right? But I'm old enough to remember that for us, it was like, oh no, you have to work out for an hour at a time. If you're not working out for an hour at a time, you're not being efficient with your training. And science has now taught us, well, it's not about the amount of time per session. It's about how much time you get per day, if that's making sense to you guys. All right, let me go ahead and flip on to the next slide. So the next one, like I said, it's lack of motivation. And this is going to be a biggie with a lot of people. Just, so much of life is about our motivation, all right? Whether it's school, whether it's exercise, whether it's relationships, whether it's finance, so much of who we are as people, it comes down to the motivation that we have. And motivation, as I say here on the left side, is what we call contextually specific. So I know that I'm highly motivated to exercise. I'm highly motivated to teach and be a college professor, highly motivated to be a tutor and help students out and do the different things that I'm doing there. All right. But I'm not so highly motivated in taking out the trash. All right. And I'm not so highly motivated in in making sure my bed in the morning that I make has hospital corners. So the idea is we all lack different motivations for certain things that we do, but we call that contextual specificity. And all that means is, yes, within this dimension of my life, I'm highly motivated to pursue a behavioral end, but in this dimension of my life, not so much. All right. So one thing I want everybody to understand about exercise is it's going to be contextually specific. You might be engaging in aerobic exercise and you're very motivated to do that, but the thought of lifting weights and doing some strength training, honestly, it scares the crud out of you. So, your motivation is a little waning maybe in that regard. So motivation can be two different basic types or flavors, right? One flavor is called extrinsic motivation. The other flavor is called intrinsic motivation. And the way I describe this to my students in my classes is I say, think of extrinsic as meaning external, E for extrinsic, E for external. And the idea here is someone who's motivated by things that lie outside of themselves, right? So whether it's praise, whether it's attention, whether it's money, whatever it is, people are motivated by something outside of themselves. And the idea here is that we're all motivated by extrinsic reasons. I know I am, right? I know that I'd like my students to think that I do a good job in educating them. I know that I'd like to think my tutees think I'm doing a good job in opening their eyes to maybe some science. But I'm also, a blend of what we call intrinsic motivation. I for intrinsic, I for internal. So that motivation type comes from inside you, right? IN for intrinsic, IN for inside. So the idea here is it's your morals, your values, your ethics, all right? Some things that you're kind of, your brain has been built on most of your life. So the idea here is most people start exercising predominantly for extrinsic reasons. All right. They start kind of looking at, oh, I need to lose weight. I'd like to lose weight. Right. Or my doctors told me that my health values, my serum, my blood values, my lipid profiles, they could be a little better. So I probably should get those numbers down because I don't want to be scared like that on my next physical. But those are all reasons that lie outside of ourselves, right? These are things that we become motivated by that exist out in our environment. So the idea here is the fix is we want to try to shift our motivations from external or extrinsic to internal or intrinsic. Now, one of the things that we can do to kind of, and we know we have to have both, right? But the idea, like say, New Year's resolution is most people haven't gotten the extrinsic to kind of turn over into more of an intrinsic. And because they're largely motivated extrinsically, chances are when life starts stepping on their toes a little bit, or they start feeling some of the discomfort with exercise and physical training, then because it's not internal, because it's not intrinsic, they generally kind of flame out really quickly and they become kind of conflicted, if this makes sense to you guys. So the idea here is, number one, is try to kind of come up with techniques that we'll discuss here on how to kind of shift your motivation from external to internal. All right. So some of the other fixes I want to talk about real quick is something called personal accountability. So here it's just getting a training partner that you can be accountable for. And this is big. This is something that I learned a long time ago, that you have to have someone that can motivate you and you have to have someone that you can be accountable for. All right. Someone that can say, hey, I know you want to bail today. I know maybe life is tough right now and you're in a tough season of your life, but let's kind of think downstream a little bit. Let's think about the positive things that you're building with this momentum. So a personal accountability partner is just someone that can kind of get in your ears a little bit and someone that can you're accountable to each other. And accountability is very powerful in behavior change, right? Both for personal enjoyment and compliance, as I stated there on the fix. So that's one way to kind of address the motivational context, and is seeking a personal accountability partner. That kind of helps with that transition from extrinsic to intrinsic, if that makes sense to you guys. The second one I have is goal setting and tracking your progress. So we used to call this journaling. All right. And it's very powerful. It just takes something that's kind of intangible and it makes it very tangible. So goal setting and tracking is very, very powerful. And the idea here is, as you put things down on paper or in a screen or on a cell phone, it becomes very tangible to you. And as you do that, you start to have kind of a relationship with what you're writing down. And so because you go through the effort of transcribing something and doing some goal setting and tracking your progress, because you're making the personal investment in time to do that, right? You are building intrinsic motivation, because if it's extrinsic, you're going to stop doing it real quick. Oh man, I don't want to do this. It takes time, it takes effort, right? But if you put in consistently the time and the effort, that's going to help the motivational shifts from extrinsic to intrinsic. Okay, if that makes sense to you guys there. That's just some of the things that I've kind of learned about that way as well. So hopefully things are flowing with me. I'm hoping that as I'm looking at my presentation, if you guys have comments, they're kind of popping up for me. But I'll just kind of address that as I see it. All right, the last barrier is what we call personal limitations. These can be either physical or psychological limitations. You see a couple different examples of them there on the left. All right, some of these are obviously things that are more physiologically or physically based. All right, and these are just kind of the baggage that we kind of bring into an exercise and fitness environment. All right, some of these are, again, more psychological. I know for me, just kind of disclosing to you all, when I started kind of getting into exercise as more than just an athlete, when I started getting into kind of the physique aspect of it and kind of physique, performance, body composition, I had a lot of social anxieties. I had a lot of body image concerns, right? I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the fact that I had to go out in public and interact with people, just feeling how I felt and being kind of anxiety ridden about how I did look, how I thought I looked to other people. I'm an introvert by nature. So it's just something that I had to kind of battle was the last two. A lot of people have what they call medical comorbidities. So they either have functional limitations or they have maybe cardiovascular limitations, orthopedic limitations. So there's a lot of different kind of personal limitations that people can have. And it kind of depends on the limitation that we're talking about, right? So the idea here is if it's more of a physiologic or more of a medical type of situation, there's a lot of ways that you can adapt your exercise, that you can look at, hey, I want to get these health and fitness benefits out of it. So given my limitations, what type of exercises can I do that won't worsen my condition, right? So that's the clinical or professional help, right? It's just what are my physical limitations? And then how can I adapt or construct an exercise plan that addresses those limitations? Okay. The next one is just more of on the motivational side. And again, that's just reframing our motivation. And all I talked about there was trying to go from extrinsic to intrinsic, right? If we are more intrinsically motivated than we are extrinsically motivated, our exercise behaviors will kind of stand the test of time a little bit more concretely. Consider non-impact versus impact exercise options. What that means is, impact exercise is moving body through time and space and moving it kind of dynamically. So you're propelling your body, you're jumping up and down, you're running, you're jogging, and you're using gravity, all right, and biomechanics to act on your body and put stress on your orthopedic system as well as your connective tissues and that kind of stuff. That's called impact exercise. So the idea here is, depending on your medical limitations, you might want to consider what we call non-impact. Non-impact exercise would be things like swimming in a pool, right? Would be things like riding what we call an ergometer or a stationary bike. So these are things where you're not putting the stress on your orthopedic system or your connective tissue system. And the idea here is you're not using gravity so much to kind of wear down on the body in time space, if you're following me. So the idea here is that would be a fix for the limitation on maybe physiology or anatomy. Okay. And then the other thing that we have here for personal limitations is what we call taking a stepwise approach. So the term that I like to use here is called shaping, shaping. So shaping is all about taking small steps. So I always tell my students, if you want to paint the wall of a house and you want to start on the, and you're looking at a whole wall and it's like, man, that's a lot of surface area to paint. And I know I have to take it in small pieces. But the idea when you shape is that you just take certain segments of the wall, all right, and you build on the progress of those segments. Or like I always tell my students, if my goal is to, let's say, bench press 400 pounds, then the idea is I can't start by bench pressing 400 pounds. What I have to do is I have to start at 100 pounds and then 150 pounds and then 200 pounds. And you're taking small stepwise improvements to ultimately get you to a particular performance goal that you have. I saw that we had a comment here. Let me just go back and make sure I'm kind of flowing with that. just because I don't want to kind of ignore everybody, and I'm still kind of learning that, I want to make sure what I'm thinking I'm seeing is what you guys are seeing. So when I flip to a meeting chat, I want to make sure that we're not just all seeing it. But I did want to address this last text that we got here. So let me just go ahead and get down to this. Yeah. So this is someone talking about body image and self-perception as a result of having kids, and these are all legitimate issues. And like I said, think about that. When we have issues with our appearance, largely those issues are going to be extrinsically based, right? We're going to think that, well, I don't look a specific way, and perceptually, people are going to look at me in a specific kind of way that makes me feel uncomfortable. But what's implicit within that statement? The implicitness in that statement is I care about what other people think of me. And if they think negatively of me, then I'm going to think negatively of myself. That's classic extrinsic or external motivation, right? So the idea is, okay, we're all humans. We all have the social comparative aspect of ourselves. But the idea is to kind of shift that mental process of, oh, I know I put on a few pounds since my pregnancy, or I've gained a few pounds over the summer or over the winter. So the idea here is, yeah, I know I got some work to do, but I'm going to try to shift what I might think others think of me and shift it to what do I think of myself? Okay. And that's a pretty powerful thing that kind of works over time. It's not easy, right? We all know that. But it's just something that we want to go ahead and address. All right. So the last thing about barriers I want to talk about just real quick is just, a lot of people think that and then society pushes this. Society always pushes break through your limits, break through your barriers. All right. But what I have found in that mindset, if we're trying to kind of promote this westernized ideal of just being stronger than your barriers, be stronger than your limits, what that leads to, you guys, is something called burnout. Because at some point, the limits and the barriers just become too great, and we're so used to busting through them that we just waste, or I don't want to use the word waste, we are challenged by our motivations of constantly having to feel like we need to push through certain limits. So more of a holistic mindset that I want you guys to think about is not trying to break through something, but work around something. All right. Going around something generally psychically takes less energy than trying to go through something. And as an athlete, yeah, you want to push your body past certain points of either pain or discomfort to improve, right? And we'll talk about that in later seminars. But we are so ingrained in our Western culture of trying to kind of toughen up and break through something. And what I learned as a martial artist that studies more Asian-oriented martial arts is, they kind of go with the flow of life. It's like a palm tree, right? So a palm tree, I know down in Houston right now, they've been dealing with Hurricane Beryl. And when you see these hurricanes go through with all the force and all the wind that they have, and you look on TV, and these palm trees do a wonderful job of going with the flow of the wind. All right. But think about a tree that's standing there nice and rigid, and it's not moving. At some point, the barrier to standing straight up with the oncoming force of the wind will knock it over completely. But the tree that bends with the force of the wind will stay vertical longer. So you can kind of use that analogy with limits and with barriers of exercise. If you're trying to kind of stand up nice and rigid and just kind of break through them, then what you're going to do over time is at some point, these limitations or barriers will take you down. But if you can learn to go around them, if you can learn to bend with them and look for ways to adapt to them, then that's more sustaining of long-term exercise. So I want to leave you with that mindset right there. And that's just the martial artist in me talking, right? That's a black belt in martial arts talking to me of, okay, I don't always have to be the biggest, the strongest. I don't always have to be, the most put together. I don't always have to try to prove myself, all right? And by breaking through barriers, I can go ahead and just kind of go with the flow. Self-confidence is a big one here. A lot of people, beginners or introverts like me, we tend to be super self-conscious, right? We tend to compare ourselves to other people. And this was especially problematic for me back in the day in Southern California when it was just a different fitness culture. I felt like I didn't measure up to what I was seeing around me, and I felt bad about myself. Why? Because my extrinsic motivation was largely why I was training. Okay, so my self-concept kind of suffered that way. My self-confidence suffered that way. So with beginning exercisers, that's something that we have to kind of take into account is it takes time to build self-confidence. How you start to build it is look at the motivational schemes and do it intrinsically, where we're not reliant on other people. We're not reliant on situations or cultural norms. We're not reliant on that. We are reliant about our efforts that we're putting in, the rewards that we're getting from our efforts, and the small steps that we're taking to meet our challenges. So that's what we want to do there in terms of exercise self-confidence is we want to think about incremental improvement. And again, from an intrinsic motivation perspective. So that will help with self-confidence as we start taking these small steps. So this week, my goal is to go to the gym twice. Okay. Ultimately, I want to go way more than that. I want to go train and I want to go exercise 2 times this week. Right. Then you meet that small, simple step. You reward yourself, right, in some ways. And we'll talk about that more in later presentations in terms of the types of rewards that work well in an exercise setting. Okay. But the idea is we take this small step and we feel pride and we feel satisfaction in going 2 times a week. Okay, now let's try to go 3. So that's the incremental shaping improvement that will help with self-confidence. By meeting one goal, we gain intrinsic self-confidence. Now we're going to extend that a little bit more. Not a whole lot more, but a little bit more. It's a small step. Okay, so I want you guys to think about that. People that are more introverted or less self-confidence, these are people who are more likely to seek solitary exercise environments or home-based routines. COVID kind of changed this a little bit. I know my wife and I used to work out an awful lot outside of our house, but since COVID times, and we both do some instructing online, the idea is we kind of have our own gym there. And now that we've been doing it for a while, we're more comfortable doing it down there, all right? Our own home-based routines for a number of different reasons, okay? And again, I talked about shaping real quick here. So again, think about shaping as climbing some stairs, and you can't get to the top by jumping up there. You have to take small steps to get to an ultimate goal. And then as you take these steps and accomplish these steps, you gain more self-confidence to take the next step, if that makes sense to you guys. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is just building exercise adherence. So the first 20 minutes or so was all about addressing the barriers. Now it's about looking at some specific techniques to build exercise adherence. So what I want to focus on here is we've kind of talked about some of the reasons why people start and stop exercise. The first bullet point there is something I want to just call to everybody's attention because it's a whopper, right? 80% of the people who begin an exercise regimen don't stick with it. All right. And why is that? Well, the psychologist in me thinks because they were extrinsically motivated. All right. And that makes sense to certain levels. But because they were extrinsically motivated and something eventually got in their way or stepped on their toes, or maybe they had some kind of challenge come up as a result of it, because they took their motivation from things outside of themselves, they said, hey, I can't deal with this right now. I don't have time for it right now. It's a little harder than I thought it was going to be right now. And then that leads to kind of what we call attrition, right? Exercise attrition. All right, next slide. So here's some strategies, and this is what I want to focus on. The first thing is, again, work out with friends. So this is kind of like your workout accountability partners, right? So friends are going to be people that are going to give you that social support and the encouragement. They know you. Obviously, they're friends, so they value your positive attributes and your positive characteristics. So they're going to know your limitations a little bit, and they're going to be motivated to kind of help you address some of those limitations, right? So that's going to be one of the things for exercise adherence is just don't do it by yourself, right? There are some introverts that obviously can do it by themselves, but it's like my wife always tells me in the spirituality. Oh, why can't I get closer to God just studying the Bible myself and just thinking inside my own head? And it's like, well, to grow spiritually, to grow religiously, it's a communal effort. You have to support each other. You have to kind of bounce ideas off each other. And so you can kind of think of exercises the same way. If you do it personally, at some point, you're going to kind of suffer by that because you're going to not have really necessarily the motivational framework in place to keep it done consistently, if that makes sense to you guys. So working out with friends helps that. Begin easily, increase slowly. That's all about shaping, okay? Don't try to bite off more than you can chew initially, especially if you're just starting out. The idea here is just build on small successes. They might seem ridiculously small. Hey, I would love to just be able to go up and down the stairs or up and down the driveway a couple times, maybe a couple times a week. So you just set very simple performance goals. Start easy. It might be too easy, but then you build on those. Okay, so that's something I want to talk about. Cross training. Cross training is something I'm going to talk about later on with aerobic and anaerobic exercise. But cross training is doing different activities and doing different exercise patterns than what you constantly do. So the idea here is just kind of keeping it fresh, right? So one of the things that I used to do on my football days back at UCLA is we used to get so tired of being in the weight room all the time. So our coaches and our trainers said, hey, we want you guys to do ballet. We want you guys to do some racquetball. We want you guys to do tennis. We want you guys to do some other sports that will kind of keep your mind fresh and take you out of the weight room, right? Take you out of your traditional exercise behaviors and give your body something else to do for what we call active relaxation. So that's also something that's going to help with exercise adherence. If you can come up with a couple different activities to supplement what you're doing in an exercise setting, then it's going to maintain this psychological freshness, if that makes sense to you guys. So that's something I want you to think about as well. So working out with friends establishes accountability. All right. Shaping or beginning easy and slowly increasing your efforts. That's building self-efficacy. That's building self-confidence. And then cross-training just keeps your mind and your body fresh and will avoid things like overtraining. Here's just a little graphic of that. The next thing is I want to talk about is just monitoring your progress. So I'll talk about these processes a little bit later on, but something called SMART goals. So I'm going to talk about this more when we get into how do you structure an aerobic exercise plan? How do you structure an anaerobic exercise plan? But the idea here is to develop SMART goals. We work with these on our students all the time. All right. The idea here, SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. And it's a specific goal setting strategy. You can Google that. But the idea here is you want to kind of make a very specific goal that you can kind of try to achieve. A lot of people make very broad general goals and there's no outcome measure, right? There's no end point and they become frustrated because they don't meet those goals. But when you write down a very specific measurable goal on a piece of paper, as I have right there for you to kind of look at, that becomes something that you can do and something that you can have as a specific outcome. Keeping an exercise journal, I already kind of talked about that. Typically what people do is they put their SMART goal in their journal and they journal or they chart their different performances and their exercise patterns as it starts to meet those performance goals. Okay, so here's the SMART goal, just kind of a graphic. I know this is being recorded. I know this will be kind of sent out to different people, but I'll talk more about SMART goals and how to construct them later on. If you guys want to hit up some of these other presentations, like I said, if you came in a little bit late, we're going to try to do these once a month and just kind of build on them. So this is a very general presentation I wanted to construct first off, but I'll get into SMART goals and how to make them more realized in both an aerobic and an anaerobic context. Here's some more examples right here. And I want to spend maybe a minute looking at that. The idea here is we're breaking down our goals. And if you look at each one of these, and I do this with my students all the time, okay, are they specific? Yes. We're talking about the amount of time we're going to need. We're talking about, are they realistic? We're talking about, are they measurable? All right. So all of these different examples that I gave you guys, these are all very specific. I'm telling you exactly what I want to do. All right. Are they measurable? Yes, I can measure all these things. I'll talk about reps and sets, and I'll talk about a lot of these factors in later presentations, right? But the idea here is I want to develop as specific of a goal as possible. It's not vague. People have a hard time achieving vague goals, guys. They need kind of that pathway set out before themselves, and they need to know exactly what steps they have to take to be on that pathway. So this is going to be an example that we're going to talk about later on, but I just wanted to introduce the concept of a SMART goal at this point, okay? Just a couple other things about exercise adherence before we bounce to the next one is just, trying to make it convenient for your schedule. So the idea here is to take, again, these movement snacks. The idea is just, again, I want you to think on the more macro tip of not so much the micro if you were here initially with the presentation. And the idea here is just look for periods of time throughout the day to unplug from responsibilities or behaviors that you're currently doing and just be purposeful about trying to incorporate some movement or some exercise into that moment in time. Okay. And the idea is you build it more around convenience to what you have going on. Establishing a routine, right? What we know in sport and exercise psychology is in order for something to become a routine, I don't know if you guys know this, you need about 3 weeks. It takes about 3 weeks to develop a routine. My wife had me on, I used to love Coca-Cola and Pepsi, caffeinated, sugar full. Now she has me on sugar free. And because I've been doing it for a couple months, I don't think about it anymore. But man, those first 3 weeks before it became a routinized, and routinized means routine, before it became a routine behavior, I had a hard time with this. But now, because it's been over 3 weeks-ish, it's an involuntary behavioral process now. All right. So I want you guys to think about that routine. Routines, once you do them for about 2 to 3 weeks, they become kind of second nature. Okay. It says combine family time with exercise. This is fun. My wife used to do this with her kids. She used to just say, you know what, I'm going to hold my kids while I exercise. Excuse me if I'm sweating a little bit here. My wife tried to change these light bulbs in her chandelier by her table, but you know they're still kicking out some heat. But we want to look to do things with family. And the idea here is we're going to get intrinsically rewarded to exercise with family. And that's going to keep us in the adherence mode a little bit more. All right, thoughts to share there. I think most of you guys, when you have a thought, it pops up on my screen. I think we're kind of cruising through pretty well here. I want to talk about really quickly some specific techniques to promote exercise. And I've kind of hit on a few of these, and these are something that I'm going to I'll talk about specific to aerobic exercise. I'll talk specific about anaerobic exercise, strength training. But these techniques can be very specifically applied within context. Behavioral shaping, right? What that means is, again, taking these small stepwise approaches and just building on the success of each step. Kids do this very, very well. When they're learning how to walk, when they're learning how to do different things. I'm watching my wife's 2-year-old grandson learn how to walk, or 2-month-old grandson rather. No, he's 2 years. Learning how to walk. And he can't just, he's doing small different things as his body matures. All right. And I'm watching him learn these new behaviors. And he can't do the behaviors fully yet. But what he's trying to do is approximate his target behavior by breaking it down. And he's not volitionally doing it. He's like, oh, I'm going to break down my behavior into smaller steps. But he's just building on the success of taking one step at a time to ultimately scoot across the kitchen like he does. Cueing, what that is just taking cues from your environment. Maybe it's a Post-it note on a fridge. Maybe it's a text from a friend in the morning. Hey, you should meet me at the gym this morning, and we should go for a walk around the block this morning. Or, you know, during a break, during our normal academic day, we're going to take a walk around campus together. All right. And so maybe a text from an accountability partner would serve as a cue, a reminder. Cues are reminders that, hey, I want to go ahead and do this. I used to leave a little note on my refrigerator, and when I started breaking the Coke habit, and it was just a little picture of a Pepsi or a Coke with a little do not do stick, like a little skull and crossbones picture on it. And that was a little cue to remind me, hey, this is the behavior I'm working to achieve. So every time I open the fridge, all right, just think about that cue and the goal that I'm trying to do. And I talked a little bit about journaling. We start with SMART goals. We break down our performance goals into very specific steps. And then we journal our actions and our behaviors and our exercise strategies along the way. And again, by making it tangible, by making it 3-dimensional, instead of just, I want to do that, or I ought to do that. Okay. Once we can make it tangible and put it out there in reality and time and space, it becomes easier to follow. That makes sense to you guys. So behavioral shaping, I'm not going to really kind of get into these slides too much and reread them. But what I have here is just, obviously I have a definition of it, and I have an example of each one, just in terms of how it can kind of be applied. But I've kind of spent a little bit of lip service on this. So I think if you've kind of been listening to me blab here for a while, you know, you kind of have a pretty decent handle on behavioral shaping. Here's just a little question to kind of consider for everybody. I know I tend to run it over. I like to tie this up within 5 or 10 minutes. But the idea here is, have we used shaping? And honestly, initially, yes, I did. I just wanted to cut down from this amount of Cokes per week to that amount of Cokes per week, and then build on the success of that and substitute it with Coke Zeros and Pepsi Zeros. So that's how I used behavioral shaping, right? I knew I couldn't go from 100 down to 0. So instead I went from 100 down to 80, down to 60, down to 40, down to 20, down to 0. So that's how I did it in my life. If you have some thoughts to share there as I'm cruising through the rest of the presentation, feel free. A lot of people have done this, maybe not maybe so much in the exercise setting, but maybe more of a behavioral or maybe a social setting. Okay. Here's some other aspects of the how-tos of behavioral shaping. I'm not going to necessarily kind of read this per se, because we've already kind of talked a lot about it as I've gone through the presentation. But the idea here is, again, we can't get to the top of the ladder in one jump. We have to take the small steps, the rungs on the way up the ladder. So that's how we think about behavioral shaping. Techniques for behavioral shaping, again, cueing is a big one. All right. So the cue is kind of the first stage of developing a habit, right? And what I tell my students about cues is they're triggers. So cues can be internal or external, and they can be anything that prompts a person to behave in a behavior. So my wife and I have the Bible beside our couch, and that serves as a cue or a reminder to me that when we sit down for a glass of wine in the evening, hey, there's the Bible, let's read a little bit from it. All right. A lot of people, a lot of my students will leave their gym bags by the door on the way out of their house or their apartment. And that serves as a cue or a reminder, hey, I want to go work out today. And so I'm going to put my packed gym bag by the front door. Maybe you construct your meals and you put it in your fridge the night before. And so when you open your fridge in the morning for breakfast before you start your day, there's your cue. This is the food you're going to have today. So that's kind of some applications of cueing. But what that does is it starts the habit. The more you cue, the more automated and routinized your behavior becomes, because you have these reminders in time and in space that, yes, I want to do that behavior. There's just some examples of some cues right here. I've already shared a couple of these, right? You guys can kind of go ahead and look through them. And it's just, these are just different kinds of aspects of time, location, right? So I've already kind of addressed a lot of these different types of things right here. We are all, again, humans are very routinized creatures. We like routine. We like this to be able to predict and accomplish the same things if we can routinely. A lot of us psychologically and physically don't do well with things changing all the time. So we are creatures of economy mentally, and we like routines. So the idea with cueing is to help establish that routine by placing reminders in time space. All right, a couple more slides and we're getting there. Journaling, talked about this as well. Okay, this is going to help with that motivational thing. So this is a therapeutic activity. Journaling is powerful, guys. I wonder if you journaled before, if you haven't journaled before, it's powerful to put your thoughts and your perceptions on a piece of paper. And actually, honestly, as a professional expert in this area, I would recommend a good old paper and pencil strategy instead of typing it into your cell phone or a tablet. I've just found that by taking the time and the space and the effort to take a writing implement, even though it's OG and so old school to think about, instead of just typing on some keys or swiping around on your phone, when you actually take the time and the investment of energy to take paper and pencil and put them together and actually journal your thoughts, your behaviors, it's very, very powerful. Journaling is one of the most powerful ways to change your exercise behavior. All right. And there's a lot of different things you can do with it. And again, in later presentations, later presentations will be a little shorter than this, and they'll be a little bit more specified, a little bit more in depth to a specific exercise strategy, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. Okay. These are just some tips for keeping a journal. But again, you can find most of this stuff online. And it's just something that I'm not going to spend any time talking about here. One thing I will do is talk about something called behavioral stacking. And the idea here is, again, to add new healthy behaviors to your daily routine. All right. So the idea that of doing this is just slowly introducing new habits into your daily routine. And then by putting new habit on top of new habit on top of new habit on top of new habit, what you're trying to do is you're trying to stack these new habits, and then ultimately they become kind of routinized, right? So that's this whole concept of behavioral stacking. It's just helping you add new healthy habits to your daily routine gradually, right? So the idea here is just to start building, really, it's like putting a brick house together. You're starting with bricks and you're attaching bricks on top of bricks. So the idea here is you attach healthy behavior to healthy behavior to healthy behavior, and you're just slowly building. Okay. Thanks for hanging with me. Just got a couple of slides left. These are just my conclusions. So if you kind of hung with me here a little bit, the idea that I've kind of wanted to get across to most everybody here, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the screen here because I kind of wanted to just kind of put a bow on this for you. So this is going to be the first part of a multi-presentation colloquium series that we're doing here at the Science Center. And the idea is we're starting at the macro or the large level, and we're going to go ahead and break it down into more specific components of training like anaerobic training, aerobic training. We're going to talk about some diet and some exercise. My better half over there in the other room is a nutritionist, a sports nutritionist. So I'm going to get some input from her, and we're going to offer a colloquium or a webinar on constructing a healthy diet. and more specifically, how do we construct a diet for anaerobic training and let's say muscle mass improvements? How do we construct a diet for weight loss? We'll get into some of those in later presentations. But today was about addressing this concept psychologically of, how do we begin to think about exercise? How do we begin to initiate the process of exercise? And how do we begin to maintain the process of exercise? So what I did is I hit up on a couple different things. The first of which is I hit up on the motivational aspect. And the first thing that we have to do is we have to look at our motivational frameworks. And I think I'm not quite sure when it's going to be. I know she has it 1 week a month, and I'm sure she'll get on the horn and she'll send out some communications. I'll see if Melissa has any advice on how we can go ahead and get that out. I don't exactly know when she has it set, but we'll make announcements for that. So thank you for your question. So again, the psychological components. What is it that we can do motivationally to start to shape our exercise behavior? And then we talked about some of the barriers to exercise behavior and some of the fixes for those barriers. And then the second half of the presentation, I wanted to get to kind of some specific strategies on how to begin an exercise behavior, like shaping, like cueing, like journaling, all right, like constructing SMART goals. So that was my idea there. And then the last part of this presentation was to give you guys some specific examples of that. All right, so I want to go ahead and kind of close it down with that. And thank you all for showing up. I think this was a great turnout for the first session. I hope you guys can kind of hit up the rest of the ones. Again, I just try to paint with broad strokes, kind of where we're going in this colloquium series. And we want to kind of begin. We want to shape this, right? We want to shape this colloquium series. So I'm starting on the bottom step, and I'm saying, hey, this is a very basic, broad step. Let's take this first step. Let's accomplish this. Let's talk about some of the psychological characteristics. All right, now let's shape. Let's go to a higher step. Let's talk about specific types of exercise and what do you do? Okay, if you have any questions, August 5th at 8 p.m. Thank you, Melissa. She knows I'm a dude that just checks his schedule every week, and I just kind of roll with my responsibilities. But I thank you all for attending. If you got any questions, send me some stuff in the chat. Otherwise, hope to see you guys next. I think the next presentation I'm doing is on aerobic exercise. So we're going to kind of build on this, and we're going to talk about specific techniques to work on our aerobic fitness and our aerobic improvement. All right, guys. Thanks so much.